Every automobile is equipped with rear view mirrors. The mirror is necessary for safe driving. A good driver is one who keeps his eye focused on the road ahead, but also glances in the rear view mirror to see what is going on behind him, what has passed, and what is going on with the side view mirrors to his left and right. Well, today we are going to look into the rear view mirror of the church as we begin our 4-week message series entitled Secret Saints. We're going to look behind us at the church's history to focus on some of the lesser-known saints. Now, when we picture saints or have images of saints, they are usually seen with kind of halos on their heads, surrounding their heads, reflecting their holiness. They sometimes have their hands folded like this in prayer. They seem to be in a mystical trance or some heavenly state of being. We see them as perfect and always doing the right things. I mean, isn't that the way we become saints? But if we look back at how they lived their lives on earth, we see that they were ordinary people just like you and me. Some saints lived scandalous lives. St. Paul, before he was converted to Jesus, was a murderer, killing Christians because of their beliefs. St. Augustine was a womanizer before he was touched by Christ through the prayers of his mother, St. Monica. Then we have those saints who at times doubted and struggled with their faith and God's call in their life. Mary, the mother of Jesus, questioned the angel Gabriel when he announced to her that she was to bear forth the Savior. "How can this be?" she said to the angel. So at first, Mary doubted God's call for her. Recently, we heard that St. Teresa of Calcutta was also questioned and doubted her faith. So you see, saints are pretty much like all of us. They were far from perfect, but somehow God touched their hearts and allowed them to say yes to doing God's will in their lives. And what is God's will? You know, we hear that word sometimes used very loosely. Maybe we've said it ourselves or heard people said when someone died, it's God's will. That's baloney. God does not will death. He wills life. And Jesus tells us God's will in the scriptures. He tells us in the great commandment to love God and to love neighbor. That's our call as Christians. That's part of our mission, parish mission statement here. Love God, love others, right? That's the will of God for us who are believers in Jesus Christ. So, let's look at our secret saint for today and see how he loved God and loved neighbor. First, it's interesting to note that for the first 1,000 years of the church's existence, saints were proclaimed by popular demand. Back then, there was no formal process of naming a saint for canonization by a pope like there is today. So, in the first 1,000 years of the church's existence, saints were named by the people. The first saint canonized by a pope was St. Ulrich of Augsburg. This is our secret saint for today. Now, how many of you know St. Ulrich? I didn't even know him. Ulrich was born in 893 in what would be the present-day Switzerland. He was appointed a bishop when he was only 30 years old. As bishop, he strove to improve the low moral and social conditions of the clergy at that time. He provided for the poor and rebuilt decaying churches and monasteries, and he died at the age of 80 years old. Now, his accomplishments, we look at those accomplishments, and they don't sound extraordinary, do they? But he led a simple life, centered on Christ, and doing the best to follow God. And so, is that all it takes to be a saint? I mean, in our gospel reading today, Jesus answers that question. He says, "Who is my mother and brothers?" And looking around at those seated in the circle, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." Now remember what the will of God is? Love God, love others, neighbor, okay? And in order to love, there must be a certain amount of surrendering of our own will in order to do what is loving for others. And when we love, our lives are transformed and changed for the better. Please bear with me if you heard this story before, but it was a significant moment in my life that was transforming. In my last assignment in California at St. Joan of Arc Church as pastor there, we had 5 masses on a weekend. And that weekend that I was there, the associate was gone, and I couldn't find a priest to help with the masses. So I had to say all the masses by myself and preach all the masses. So Saturday I had confessions, I had the 4:30 mass, then I went out to dinner and came back because we had a 7:30 morning mass. 4 o'clock in the morning, I get a phone call from the hospital, which is about a mile away from where the rectory was, the church was. So there was someone who was dying, in the process of dying, and so they called me to anoint him. So I got dressed and went to the hospital, into the ICU unit. And this gentleman who was dying, he was hooked up to all of these machines and everything. His family were there. And so we prayed for him. I prayed with the family, anointed him, and spent about a good 45 minutes to an hour with the family. By the time I left, it was time for the 7:30 Mass, basically. So I had a little breakfast and got ready for that Mass, and then had 7:30 Mass, 9 o'clock Mass, and 10:30 Mass. And after the 10:30 Mass, I got a phone call on the emergency line, and it was the family. And I called back. They left the number. I called them back, and they said that their loved one, the father, had died, and they wanted me to come to pray with them. And I explained to them, well, I have the 12 o'clock Mass, and then I had baptisms at 1:30, and then I had a vigil service for a well-known parishioner who passed away in the church at 2:30. And so I wouldn't be able to get there until around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And they said, we'll wait for you, Father. Okay. So I did the last Mass. I had the baptism. I had about a half hour in between that and the vigil service. And so I went into the backyard of the rectory, and we had a fountain there. And I'm saying, I'm going to sit quietly and pray and just be quiet. And my mind was going like crazy. And I said, why, God? What's happening here? So I did the vigil service, and driving to the hospital, I was still thinking about me. And I got to the hospital and went to the ICU unit, and they had removed all of the tubes and everything from the deceased, and he was lying so peacefully. And when I saw that changed me in some way. I don't know how, I don't know why, and it's not important to know why. All I know that I was changed from who I was before, kind of complaining about that I had to be here, to the most pastoral person I've ever been in my life. So we prayed with them. I gave them the number of the parish so we can plan the funeral and so forth. And as I was leaving the ICU unit, another woman came out of another room, and she says, "Oh, Father, could you anoint my mother?" And I said, "I'd be happy to do that." And I looked around and I said, "Who said that?" Because that wasn't me a few minutes ago. Oh my gosh, And so I'd be happy to do it. So I went to the car to get the oils, and I came back and I spent some time with them, and then I drove home again. And I reflected on that experience. And in my surrendering. Now, I didn't want to go to the hospital at that second time, but I went anyway. And in my surrendering, and I had to surrender to myself. I could have stayed home, but I didn't. In my surrendering, God was able to use that moment to transform "it's all about me" attitude into "it's all about others" attitude. That's holiness. That's holiness. Holiness is when God transforms us into becoming better people. Holiness is wholeness of life. Jesus was holy because he was the most whole human being that ever existed in this world. These moments of holiness can be experienced in some simple, small acts of generosity. Did you see on Facebook this past week? I'm on Facebook, so I would watch Facebook. You see this video of this older woman, this elderly woman, trying to climb the stairs with her walker. And all of a sudden, this young boy, must be 7 years old, gets out of the car, and he's helping this woman go up the steps with her walker, one step at a time, caring for her, watching her go up the steps. And when they got to the top, she embraced him, and he left. Now, that child had to surrender his own will. Maybe he was going to the movies with his friends, or maybe he was going to play baseball or something, but he had to say no to his driver, whoever that was, maybe his mother or father, whoever, and said, "Stop the car because I want to help this person." So he had to surrender that in some way, his own will in some way. And after completing his service, the woman gave him a big hug. And I wonder how he felt about all of that. Judging from the way he joyfully bounded down the stairs, I think he felt blessed about helping. That's holiness. Teresa of Calcutta said, "Holiness is a normal thing, nothing extraordinary. We become holy one step at a time, one small act of kindness at a time, one smile at a time." St. Teresa of Lisieux said, "Miss no single opportunity of making some small sacrifice. Here by a smiling look, there by a kindly word, always doing the smallest right and doing it for love." The saints understood that, and hopefully we do too.